So, good morning, ma'am. Good morning, everyone. So, the topic of today's discussion is all about obligation of the debtor or obligor. So, the obligation of the debtor or obligor is determined into four ways. So, we have obligation to give a specific or determinate thing, which is presented by yours truly and Miss Kalangan. Number 2, obligation to give a generic or indeterminate thing, which is presented by Miss Agustin. Obligation to do, presented by Mr. Marcos and Miss Corpuz. And obligation not to do, which is presented by Mr. Dancel. So today, I will discuss to you the duties of the debtor or obligor in obligation to give a specific or determinate thing. So number 1, we have to deliver the thing. Number 2, to take care of the thing before the delivery. Number 3, to deliver the fruits of the thing. So, to take care of the thing before delivery in Article 1163, every person obliged to give something is also obliged to take care of it with the proper diligence of a good father of a family, unless the law or the stipulation of the parties requires another standard of care. So, ano ang tungkulin o obligasyon ng isang debtor in an obligation to give a specific thing? And by reading the provision, malalaman mo na ang obligasyon ng isang debtor under obligation to give specific thing ay, una, the debtor or obligor must preserve the thing. Meaning, pending delivery, if you are the obligor, kailangan mo itong ingatan at alagaan. Paanong pag-iingat nga ba? So sabi ng Article 1163, diligence of a good father of a family. Ang ibig sabihin nito ay ordinary diligence. Hence, in preserving the things to be delivered, the general rule is debtor must exercise diligence of a good father of a family unless the law or stipulation requires different standard of care. So, maliban na lamang kung ang batas o ang nakasaad sa kasunduan ay iba, kung may ibang hinihingi na standard of diligence ang batas o ang mismong nakasaad sa kasunduan. Like for instance sa mga common carrier, yung mga engaged in public transportation. Sa kanila, the diligence is required is more than of a good father of a family. They are required extraordinary diligence. So in an obligation to give a specific thing, diligence of a good father of a family ang required. Failure to observe what diligence ang nakakos ng damage, that person is liable. But take note of this. This is not applicable in generic thing. Why? Bakit kaya siya hindi applicable sa generic thing? Simply because sa generic thing, na-i-explain mamaya ni Miss Agustin. So, bakit kaya hindi siya applicable sa generic thing? It's simply because hindi mo naman kailangan ibigay ang mismong bagay. You don't need to give that specific thing. So, wala kang dapat iingatan dahil ibibigay mo pa. On the other hand, if the thing is specific, hindi pwedeng ibang bagay. It should be that specific thing. So prior to the delivery, you are as a debtor has an obligation to take good care of it. So next slide. So in Article 1164, to the deliver of the fruits of the thing. So in Article 1164, it provides here that the creditor has a right to the fruits of the thing from the time the obligation to deliver it arises. However, he shall acquire no real right over it until the same has been delivered to him. So again, so sabi niya dito, the creditor has a right to take fruits of the thing. So talakayin muna natin kung ano nga ba ang ibig sabihin ng fruits na yon. So as mentioned by law, these fruits can be referred as natural, industrial, and civil fruits. So, ano-ano nga ba ang natural, industrial, and civil fruits? So, natural fruits, as defined as the spontaneous products of the soil and the young and the other products of the animal. So take note, sinabi niya dito na spontaneous product, meaning ito ay ginawa na walang intervention ng tao, walang human labor. So ang damo sa paligid na kusa na lamang tumutubo is an example of a natural fruits. Well, this in contrast naman to industrial fruits, kasi ang industrial fruits is produced by lands through cultivation or labor. For example of this is sugarcane, rice, vegetable, yung mga bawang, yung mga sibuyas, basta yung mga tanim na may human intervention or human labor na involved. On the other hand, the third kind of fruits is a virtue of juridical relation. So, ito yung tinatawag nating civil fruit. So, the best example dito ay yung renta ng mga gusali at pagpapaupa ng mga lupain. Yeah.
To deliver accessions and accessories, Article 1166. The responsibility to deliver a specific item includes the delivery of all of its achievements and accessories, even if they were not specially indicated 1097. A. Accessions as a means of achieving a higher rank or position. Examples: the accession to the throne of a prince is an illustration of the prince's accession to the throne. B. Accessories contains the objects that are joined or connected to the main thing as ornaments for its use or perfection. Example: car spare tires, television antennas, cell phone chargers, movies. To pay damages is quality of fraud, negligence, delay of contribution of the terms of the obligation. Article 1170. Article 1170. Those who commit fraud, negligence, or delay in the fulfillment of their obligations, or who violate the tenor thereof in any way, are liable for damages.
So in my part, I will going to tackle about the duties of the debtor and the obligor in obligation to give a generic thing or indeterminate thing. So what does this mean? It refers to a class or genus which it pertains and cannot be pointed out particularity. Generic thing. Unlike specific thing, this is not distinct from others and cannot be classified or determined. Generic thing, ibig sabihin nun, if ever mawala yung ibibigay natin or ma-damage yung i-deliver natin, pwede naman tayong makapag-deliver ng iba pang bagay. For example, ang napag-usapan na i-deliver ay a bottle of wine. But unfortunately, nawala yung wine. So, pwede namang bumili ng iba pang wine if ever nawala yung supposedly na ibibigay natin. It means generic, indeterminate thing can't be specifically determined from things of the identical class, but the thing is replaced by another thing that is on the identical quality. There are 3 duties of debtors in obligation to give a generic thing. First is to deliver the thing. This is the obvious part. Obligation is to deliver the thing. Second is to bear the expenses of having someone else comply with the obligation. You can see this in the article 1165 paragraph 2. So, ang sinasabi naman dito is, for example, Aaron is obliged to deliver a cake on Historia's birthday, but unfortunately, Aaron is out of ingredients and supplies to make the cake. So, what will happen? So, ang mangyayari nito is pwedeng yung creditor mag-ask na lang ng iba to comply with Aaron's obligation. But, ang magbe-bear pa rin ng expenses is si Aaron, the original debtor pa rin. So, ayun yung sinasabi sa letter B or number 2. To bear the expenses of having someone else comply with obligations. Number 3 is to pay damages if guilty of fraud, negligence, delay, or contravention of the terms of the obligation. First is the fraud. It is deliberate or intentional evasion of the normal fulfillment of an obligation. Example, Aaron is selling a concert ticket to Historia. In order for him to gain money, Aaron says to Historia it is a real ticket, but it is fake. So, as a ground for damages, it implies some kind of malice or dishonesty, and it cannot cover cases of mistake and errors of judgment made in a good faith. It is synonymous to bad faith in that it involves a design to mislead or deceive another. Second one is the negligence. It means that it is any voluntary act or omission. For example, Sasha is a passenger in an airplane. So, in here, there is considered a contract a contract of carriage between the Sasha and the owner of the airline company. In consideration of the fare to be paid by Sasha, the owner of the airline company, through the pilot and the crew members of that plane, they agrees to bring safely Sasha, including those passengers, to their destination. But if through the recklessness of the crews to the passengers, like for example, they are not providing a good service, or the airplane contain defective parts that can cause to an accident occurs, as a result of which the passengers will get injured. So there is being no bad faith or malice, which prevents the normal fulfillment of an obligation. And next is the delay, which is the failure to perform an obligation on time, which failure constitutes a breach of the obligation. For example, due to the unforeseen events like may bagyo or nagka-landslide, yung hindi mo na makontrol yung mangyayari. Kaya nagkakaroon ng delay sa may di-deliver na bagay, kaya hindi na nagawa yung obligation. And for the last is the contravention of the terms of the obligation. This is the violation of the terms and conditions stipulated in the obligation. The contravention must not be due to a fortuitous event or force majeure. When we say fortuitous event, these are the acts of God, like floods, typhoon, rains, landslides, earthquakes. And for the force majeure, it talks about yung mga kaganapan na nagmula sa gawa ng mga tao, like war, robbery. So I will give an example of contravention of the terms of the obligation. So Ella leased the apartment of Raya for 10,000 a month to be paid in advance during the first week of every month. For your information, yung lessor is yung nagpapaupa. Yung lease ay yung nag-uupa. So, the obligation of Ella as lease is to pay the stipulated rent. And the obligation of Raya as a lessor is to maintain Ella in peaceful possessions of the apartment leased. If ever Ella violates her obligations, Raya is entitled to eject her from the premises and recover damages. On the other hand, if Raya does not maintain Ella in the peaceful possession of the apartment and Ella is ejected, Raya may be held liable for the damages for violation of the terms of her obligation. The measure of damages to be awarded to Ella or to Raya, as the case may be, is left to the sound discretion of the court in accordance with the provisions of the Civil Code on damages.
An obligor, also known as a debtor, is a person or entity who is legally or contractually obligated to provide a benefit or payment to another. In a financial context, the term obligor refers to a bond issuer who is contractually bound to make all principal payments and interest payments and outstanding debt. For example, for interest payment. Mas na kumakinyak ag loan na ti 50,000 ti may sa bangko. Ket kailang ada maksay basit nga 20%. For example, kumakit ti 50,000 minus 20%. Ket ti lang no ka maalam ket 40,000. DJ 10,000 ket semrek ka DJ nga bangko no kwa. Article 1167. If a person obligated to do something fails to do it, the same shall be executed at his cost. This same rule shall be observed if he does it in contravention of the tenor of the obligation. Furthermore, it may be decreed that what has been poorly done be undone. Article 1167 refers to an obligation to do, that is to perform an act or render a service. It contemplates three situations. Number 1, the debtor fails to perform an obligation to do. Number 2, the debtor performs an obligation to do but contrary to the terms thereof. Number 3, the debtor performs an obligation to do in the poor manner. Performance at debtor cost. If the debtor fails to comply with his obligation to do, the creditor has the right to have obligation performed by himself or by another at debtor expense to recover damage. In case the obligation is done in the contravention of terms or is poorly done, it may be ordered by the court that it shall be reversed if still possible.
Number 3, to undo what has been poorly done. Number 4, to bear expenses of having someone else undo what has been poorly done. Article 1167, Part 2. Article 1167, if a person obliged to do something fails to do it, the same shall be executed at his cost. The same rule has been observed if he does it in contravention of the tenor of the obligation. Furthermore, it may be decreed that has been poorly done be undone. Article 1167 refers to an obligation to do, to perform an act or render a service. It contemplates three situations whereas the debtor fails to perform an obligation to do, perform obligation to do but contrary to the terms thereof, and perform an obligation to do but in a poor manner. Here are some remedies of creditor in positive personal obligation. The debtor fails to comply with his obligation to do. The creditor has the right to have the obligation performed by himself or by another unless personal consideration are involved. At the debtor's expense and the recovered damages in case the obligation is done is contravention of terms of same is poorly done. The court may order upon complaint that it be undone if it is still possible to undo what has done. If the debtor fails to perform the obligation to do, note that the creditor could ask someone else, a third person, to perform the obligation to do at the expenses of the debtor. Number 5. To pay damages if guilty of fraud, delay, or contravention of the terms of the obligation. Article 1170. So, Article 1170 of the Civil Code states that those guilty of fraud, delay, or negligence in the performance of their obligations, or those who in any ways contravene the tenor of their obligations, be held liable for damages. For example, Cebu Pacific Airways branch of contract is the inability to fulfill the specifications of contract without any legal reason. It can also be defined as the failure to perform any promise forming part or whole of the contract without legal excuse. Those who are guilty of a branch of contract may not be imprisoned as it is a civil case and not a crime. They can, however, be held liable for damages or previously mentioned.
Duties of debtor, obligor, and obligation not to do. Number 1. Not to do what has been forbidden. If something forbidden, you are not allowed to do. Just like in the public place, nakita mo na may sign doon na wag mag-sigarilyo, pero nagsigarilyo ka pa rin kahit bawal. Number 2, to undo what has been done that is forbidden, Article 116. When the obligation consists in not doing and the obligor does what has been forbidden in him, it shall also be undone at this expense. Example, Marites bought a land from Bumagat. It is stipulated in contract that Bumagat will not build a fence on a certain portion of his land, adjoining that sold to Marites. If Bumagat construct a fence in violation, in violation of agreement, Marites can bring an action to have the fence to remove at the expense of Bumagat. Number 3, to bear expense having someone else undo what being done that article forbidden. Bear consists of things that should be done but it is already done. Example, nabuntis ni Bumagat si Marites, ngayon hindi nila tanggapin yung consequence na dapat di yun mangyayari kundi sila na to pay damages if guilty of fraud, negligence, delay, or contravention of the terms of obligation Act 11 and 70. Example, no tayo boss mo di naka pinasweldo tayo ususto nga sweldo nga ada LJ kontrata kasla ko mas sahod mo ket dati kay binulang yan ititid na ka 24K cash card.